Recently, we all saw the new PlayStation 5 reveal, and it looked alright. However, the week before that even aired, I'd already ordered the new console straight from China. This right here is a box from China, containing apparently the new PlayStation 5, which I ordered from one of the most sketchy console listings I think I've ever seen. Listed solely as PlayStation V, I had to specify the colour I wanted as UK plug, which is everyone's favourite part of the rainbow, and other notable parts of the listing include that I had to pay 100 Australian dollars for this console. That's all they would sell it in, they didn't have it in any other currency, only Australian dollars. That really is all they would sell it in. Before we get this fully unboxed though, I'll throw up the description of the item, which has some great highlights in there, specifying that it comes with all the game, the cup run digit 64-bit system will run faster, and all in all there's some great stuff in there. It is worth noting though they do refer to this as the PlayStation 5 twice in the listing, and it has no other brand names on it at all. In fact, they even list the brand as being Sony. So what have they actually sent me? Is this actually the PlayStation 5? Well, probably not, but still, what is in the box? After getting through the frankly abysmal packaging, it seemed like we had now unveiled our new console. And although there is no mention of Sony at all here, I can see why they wouldn't want their name on the packaging at all, mostly because they would sue the company that ever tried to do it. However, they did finally get their new catchy next-gen slogan on the box: Cool Child HD Radio Arcade Video Game Machine, which really lets you know what you're getting in for. Sort of. It doesn't really inspire much confidence in the product inside. However, that wasn't the worst part at all. No, it got far worse, claiming to be HD wireless, and despite showing what appears to be a knockoff Xbox 360 controller on the front of the box, they've opted for what looks like PS3 controllers on the bottom of the box. Part of that crossplay and legacy appeal, I'm sure. But what is now inside this box? Sitting right at the top appears to be the PlayStation 5, wrapped in the highest quality plastic I've ever seen. It feels a bit like the plastic they wrap bread in at Asda after it's gone on discount. Definitely what I want to see from a next-gen console. We've also got a HDMI cable, a NES controller for some unknown reason, a less than desirable feeling knockoff 360 controller, that part was actually the truth, some cheapo composite cables, a European USB plug with a proprietary ending USB piece flopping off the end, which is around the end of our bountiful haul. They've also managed to chuck in some accessories, a really different direction they've decided to go with this generation. I did have to do a bit more digging around the box and found an absolutely abysmal EU to UK converter which doesn't actually work, the manual for the console, which unironically comes with a warranty card. I'll be sure to fill that in for my PS5, as well as some very important information telling me that if my games don't work on this console, I should promptly go and download some more. Very important as well was a USB receiver, which was probably for the 360 controller. Or do we even call it a 360 controller? It claims to come with the PS5. Is this the official PS5 controller? It's not made by Microsoft. So what is the official stance on this? What do I call it? Is it an Xbox 360 controller? Is it a knockoff 360 controller? Is it the PS5 controller? Why am I spending so much time worrying about this? Why is this even an issue? Alright, I don't even want to get started on the star of the show, the legendary new PlayStation 5 console. So here is the PlayStation 5, and well, it is very light. I know I can't show you how light it is in a video, but it's also very small, as in my hands are there for scale around the USB ports, and you can tell this is not a very big console. Shaped very much like the PlayStation 4, but with those red accents there to give it a bit more of a gamer aesthetic in 2020. It's also got a basic push button on and off switch, two USB ports named Joy 1 and Joy 2 respectively, and they've also gone down the legacy route this time, with a composite output, as well as HDMI output on the back, as well as power and SD card slots for both powering it and game expandability. But enough suspense, just what is it like to use? What is the PlayStation 5 experience? Is it really as next-gen as it claims to be? Probably not, but oh well. With the USB receiver plugged in, after I found my own power adapter, as the one it comes with doesn't actually work in UK plugs at all. Actually, correction to that, it doesn't fit together, not that it'd be any good if it did fit together, because the UK part of the plug is wonky and won't go into any UK plug sockets. So great going there on that one, especially when I had to specify I wanted that. Other than that though, there is not much else for me to talk about. So let's cut to the live console experience. Right, this is going to be just a live segment of the video of me actually using the console. So I'm going to turn it on, if I can find the on button, there it is. And this is exactly what you can expect from the PS5. Cool Baby, as the start says, which is the brand or clone that this is. A very enjoyable warning screen, telling me to enjoy a healthy life and indulge in game, and moderate game beneficial brain. And then we arrive at the GUI. And this is where things get a little bit strange. See, I have actually changed all the language settings around so we can actually see what we're looking at. But this is the core console experience, is mostly just those 5 segments along the top. GBA game, MAME game, NES game, Sega game, and SNES game. And yes, there is a bit of delay between when I actually push the button and when it changes. But if you actually go back, you can see that we do actually have a settings menu, or a languages menu, which doesn't really offer us anything other than Canadian English and Chinese. At least I think that's down as Chinese. And there's not a great deal to it. I did manage to access scaling options earlier. I'm going to see if I can remember how. I've managed to do something completely different. I've managed to launch a game. So I think this is a version of a Mario game. But I'm going to go back to the main menu now anyway, because we'll touch more on the games and how they run and the performance in a non-recorded segment. So you can see that if I hold down back and start, we open up a save the game progress menu, which is pretty much the only bit of GUI you'll be seeing. So if I push cancel, we are now back to this bit of the menu. So as you can see, plenty of games on here. Most of the pictures don't line up at all with what we're seeing. For example, Tetris. I really doubt that is the version of Tetris that is on here. Is that even Tetris? I can't even tell. But yeah, there is a lot of fake screenshots on here. Mostly complete nonsense. But the actual games do run surprisingly well. So I'll launch a game that seemed decently impressive. Sonic 3D Flicky's Island was the one that I remember playing on PC. And as you can see there, it is running a Android emulator for these. I don't know what emulator it's running, but I will be doing a teardown and going through the specs and frame rate analysis after this segment of the video. And as you can see here, it does seem to handle most of this really, really well. I might just turn down the in-game audio a little bit there, just so I can talk a bit better. Because this is all on the fly, this is live as you see it. So this is 1996, and I believe this is the Mega Drive version of the game. And it does seem to run really well with very few issues. So there's not really any latency I'm noticing when I am controlling things. It's best to try and use the D-pad for it, because really a lot of these are older games, and they don't control all too fantastically. But it does run really well. And that was one of the main things that shocked me, is usually these consoles tend to be like NES on a chip style systems like we've seen before, and they just don't work well. And people asked me to do a live segment in my videos because they really enjoyed my PXP video where I was just talking randomly to the camera with the footage. And as you can see here, it's running really, really well. I've got frame rate capture of this that I have tested because I was really impressed by how well the game ran. And yeah, it's just very, very impressive. I will of course not be playing this for too long. I'll show you the save states in a minute. So if I go up here and jump up through this ring, and then I'll open up the GUI, and we'll save the progress to local storage. And if you note down there in the bottom left, we actually have the loading state, which is where it decides to load and save the state for some reason. I think that's just how it does it. But we come back to this menu, and you've got these options. So if I go to settings, this is where you can change the sound output from on to off. That's how you can tell it's Android. That is a very Android-style button. Button mapping, you can change all this. All of this can be changed. And you can configure this to a keyboard. You can configure that to whatever you plug in. Same goes for the second controller. Screen size, I just have it set to full. Original size does work, and scale also works, but full seems to give you the best image quality for some reason. Information just tells you the software version is v1.0, and language-wise just brings up the standard options we saw earlier. Other than that, you've just got reset default settings, which I haven't done, and I'm not going to do that for now. But anyway, let us try loading progress. So let's see which one of these is our latest one. Progress 0, it seems to be. So if we load this, this is one area I noticed. Look how long it takes to load the state. And there you go. That is actually something I remember from a video I got sent. It can't even load the save state correctly. That is actually a bug. There is not meant to be a level select in this game, so there you go. Goes to show I haven't got that to trigger once before, so that's rather interesting to get it to trigger on this live segment of the video. But yeah, it will apparently load this fine. Let's try loading a different level, see if it'll load it. Yeah, it seems to load it absolutely fine. Very strange, but you can see what I mean about the emulation quality. The actual quality of the emulation is pretty impressive, considering that this is a knockoff console. Or the PS5, however you want to look at it. This is definitely PS5 footage, next generation right here. But it's running about 60 FPS. I think this game runs at 60 FPS from what I remember. At least certain aspects of the game do run at 60 FPS. Maybe not all the animations do. But, yeah, really impressive stuff. Anyway, I'll go back to the main menu and I'll show you some more titles. Because I only want to have maybe about 10 minutes of this. 5-10 minutes. The menus can be overly sensitive sometimes. Sometimes I struggle to get back to the main menu. But I'll try something else. I'll show you some MAME emulation. There are some less than pleasant games hidden in here, which is what we will not be playing. But we'll try. We'll just scroll down. Zero Wing. I think I've heard of that before. We'll try this. See how it runs. MAME games do actually mention in the menu that they will hang for about 15 seconds when they start. And that is the case. So from what I remember, back on the controller is to add credit, which you want to do because it's an arcade game. And they do tend to run absolutely fine with fairly nice quality, which is what got me thinking that these were actually quite impressive for being cheapo garbage consoles that no one really wants to be using. But this seems to be running absolutely fine. I don't really want to play this for too long because I've got other things to talk about and other things to show you without making this segment too long. But save states seem to work most of the time. The game selection's pretty impressive, but there are also some games that you won't be able to understand at all. Pokemon Emerald, for example. Hope you're all ready for this. Does not... Well, it runs. It just, you won't be able to understand very much of it, as you can see here. I also didn't take a look at the Pokemon... Was it Ruby and Sapphire were included as the same game. So I'm quite tempted to take a look to see maybe if it's a custom ROM that they've got running. Really, I'd have to do a proper live stream to take a look through all these properly. But I just want to take a look through as many of them as possible. I think that's just Ruby version. There's nothing different about that at all. But these all work fine. I've got footage of them all running, which I'll probably throw up at some point. And yeah, I hope you've enjoyed seeing the live footage of this all running. I'll finish off with some Mario, because that's one of the more fun titles on here. There's also a lot of junk. In fact, I'm not going to finish off with Mario. I'll finish off with just showing you some of the more impressive stuff, because there was Chrono Trigger on here, from what I remember. Well, I do remember it, because I've got a load of footage of it. Stuff like this runs perfect. Some really good games on here, and because you've got the save state feature, you can use those perfectly fine. But as you can see, the pixel art is all maintained. It all looks really nice. It just works lovely. I don't know if I've got a save state around for this game, but there you go. Hope you've enjoyed seeing this live action gameplay of the console running. And we'll get back to the more in-depth scripted technical stuff. So back to me from an hour ago when I voiced over that part. To sum it up the best, the console, which I'm assuming we all know isn't the legitimate PS5 by now. I'm sorry for those of you who thought it was. Please do not buy this console. It is not good value. But yeah, it's actually a lot more convincing than the last load of releases we've seen from dodgy backstreet manufacturers. with this one containing a functioning GUI with controls actually mapped onto both of the included controllers, and it can be a bit too sensitive at times, but it does actually work. There are functioning save states for all 4 of the included emulators, which are slow. Very slow, for both saving the state and loading the state you've just saved. You can actually get into a new game long before the console manages to load in the state that you were trying to load, and this can vary from game to game and emulator to emulator, but is still rather slow compared to the quick response you usually expect from modern emulation. Otherwise, you do have very few options in the options menu. That's right, it does have an options menu. In fact, it's more locked down than a real PlayStation. You can change the language from Chinese over to Canadian English. Apparently that's the version of English they wanted to use. Other than this though, you can change some scaling options, but it's best left with the standard settings, as I found you could quite easily blur and distort the images and the outputs with the other options included, which are mostly just involving stretching pixel art games. Never really ends well. Both controllers are mediocre. The Xbox One is quite interesting, as it red rings when it turns on, which we all actually found quite funny. It's still usable. Despite the fact it's cheap and rubbery, it is actually one of the better knockoff controllers I've used, and the NES controllers are just spongy, but once again do work fine, and are about on par with what you'd expect with the ones you actually order from China anyway. In fact, it was around here I started to get a little bit more technical by plugging in keyboards and trying to access keyboard shortcuts, maybe trying to get a deep dive into the operating system. But other than basic game controls and being able to reset the console with Control-Alt-Delete, there was not much I could do, as the operating system is very locked down from the factory. Talking about technical stuff though, how is the performance and what is powering it? Well, first of all, I went through and tried to round up some of the most intensive titles I could find on the console, given that emulation of both the Mega Drive and MAME is considered harder than the usual NES games you see shoved onto these consoles, which are usually using a NES on a chip or something like that. I've got videos covering the previous consoles that do tend to make their way into the country. Either way, most games actually ran really nice. A lot of the 2D titles could drop a few frames under intensive action, but that's because they're actually more intensive than you'd think. Still, they did tend to stick to either their 30 or 60 FPS cap respectively, and pseudo 3D games could actually run really fine. They're usually really well optimized, and they did tend to stick to the 60 FPS region that a lot of them run at. In fact, most only dropped 1 or 2 frames when they were running like this. The console itself has a relatively clear output. It can output a maximum of 720p via the HDMI port, and this is a fixed resolution. You can't force it any higher or any lower. It will only output 720p. So much for the 4K they were claiming in the listing. Composite output, which is also included, it works alright. I did use my own cables and got some direct captures from the composite port, and it's passable. On a CRT, I'd imagine it would look alright, as 480i always does look better when you're looking at it on a real CRT. Just don't expect any crisp 240p output from the PS5. That goes for both the real one and the fake one. Taking all of this into account though, it makes the performance across retro consoles and arcade style stuff surprisingly impressive. Nowhere near worth what it cost me, but still, it's actually nowhere near what I would expect from a fake PS5 console, or a real PS5 as I'm not an idiot. So what is powering all this? How have they managed to get this all running as the bottom of the console was actually heating up a tad under certain intensive titles? So let's tear this all down. While we start getting this all teared down, I'm going to tell you that build quality is fairly naff. You aren't going to need a teardown guide to realise the entire console is held together by poorly glued on rubber feet with 4 screws hidden beneath them. From here though, the bottom slides off and then the top actually pulls off. It comes apart in 2 pieces. So that leaves you with 3 pieces of PlayStation 5 console. So 10 out of 10 for actually being able to get inside the console. From here though, things take a bit of a disappointing turn. The inside is about as bare as possible, which explains why the console weighs absolutely nothing. It also explains why the console feels like it wants to crack if you so much as put anything on top of it or push down at all. It is not good quality plastic. But the layout inside does make a bit of sense. One main motherboard has ribbon cables connected to it as a power switch, USB ports, and an actual display output. But the output boards and power switch are fairly self-explanatory. They are on every device in existence. It's the motherboard that's powering all this we actually care about. Secured down with 3 screws to the main board, there is very little else going on other than a heatsink on top of the SoC, which is a combination of both the CPU and GPU commonly found on mobile devices and embedded systems. But what is that combination, I hear you ask? Well, at the heart of the alleged PlayStation 5 is an Allwinner H2 Plus chip, which appears to be a cut-down version of a full Allwinner H3 chip that sells for very, very cheap in bulk amounts. It's an older ARM-based CPU that can be flashed to run a decent amount of operating systems, mostly Android and embedded OEM-style stuff, wherein there seems to be a custom variant of stripped Android running, at least on this one, with a custom dashboard and layout. There is no way to get any further than this custom dashboard and layout, as I've tried every combination I can think of, and I can't get any way past it, so that's as far as you're going to get without flashing your own operating system. There is 2GB of onboard RAM, only DDR3L based RAM, but still, that's pretty overkill considering the specifications. I'd imagine that this was the cheapest way to get dual channel RAM, which might help with graphics performance, but even then it was probably just because these things are so cheap to buy it made sense to stick them on there. The actual OS is stored on the back with some flash storage that's been soldered on, and I'd imagine if you could replace this or flash a new operating system directly onto the memory, you could probably repurpose this board. Overall though, this is passively cooled with a very small heatsink that does very little, as more heat seemed to dissipate through the bottom of the case than through the heatsink. Who knows, maybe with an overclock it could cause it to melt. Well, there we go. The PlayStation 5, or whatever it is actually claiming to be the PlayStation 5. I believe the original product is made by Cool Baby, or someone trying to clone them, as there are a lot of clones of this out there. No doubt more of them sell under the fake PlayStation name than the original game, whether because of curiosity or people actually falling for it. I'd imagine a lot of older people just see, new PlayStation 5 must be the right thing. As for my thoughts on the console, well, I can't really recommend it. It's not like the cheap £5 consoles I usually get, and this thing, although I have a refund pending, did actually cost me a bit of cash. Now, the advantage this has over older generations of fake consoles is that you can save the games, or the state of the emulators, which is pretty cool, so you can actually complete a lot of the awesome games included, like Chrono Trigger and things like that. In fact, you can even put your own games onto an SD card, and with a bit of tweaking you can get them to play on the console, and I did test this and it does actually work. You're just limited to a very mediocre emulation experience. Still, the sound and video is actually alright, as are the controls, but why can't I recommend it? Well, you'd think there's a pretty awesome selection of games already included, most of them probably less than legal, and plenty of classic titles thrown on there. But there are plenty of titles on there that really aren't great at all. There's some dodgy ROMs from some dark recess of the internet that I'm not going to talk about that really shouldn't be on here, and that's why I can't recommend it. Other than that though, it's stuck in a lot of languages you can't really understand if you're not, a native speaker of the language, as there are usually quite a few RPGs included which are quite text heavy, and I just couldn't figure out how to understand them. Other than this though, I can't recommend this even for younger users, because there really are some less than savoury ROMs included that could really ruin the aspect of this being a family-friendly console, as they're sort of hidden in the ROM piles and have just been dumped on. So at the end of the day, this has been the fake PlayStation 5, with everything from frame rate analysis through to specifications. It took me a little while to put this video together, one because the postage took nearly a month, and secondly because I didn't even think it'd arrive, so I hadn't really prepped anything for making this video. All in all though, I should be getting a refund through because this wasn't the PlayStation 5. I know I've had a lot of fun making this video and I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Good night. There we go, I hope you all enjoyed this. I always love taking a look at some of this cheap stuff that I'm able to order into the country. If you've enjoyed this, please do let me know. You can like and subscribe for more, or dislike if you don't, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.